Well, hello everyone. It's that time of year again. The leaves are changing, the air is crisp, and we all wonder, what's this winter going to be like? Snowy or mild? Heavy parkas or light jackets? Here we are on September 29th, 2025, and the big weather story we're tracking for the upcoming winter involves two major players, La Niña and the polar vortex. Think of me as your weather guide, here to help you understand the forces that will shape our weather over the next several months. Our goal is to give you the best possible look at the road ahead. Will the Pacific Northwest be getting hammered with snow? What about the East Coast? Will the South see a chill, or will it be business as usual? So, grab a warm drink and get comfortable. We're about to embark on a journey into the world of long-range forecasting. Let's get started. First up, let's talk about La Niña. You've probably heard me or my fellow meteorologists mention it before, often with its counterpart El Niño. These are part of a natural cycle called the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO for short. It all happens way out in the tropical Pacific Ocean near the equator. Sometimes ocean surface temperatures are warmer, that's El Niño, or cooler, that's La Niña. During a La Niña event, strong trade winds push warm surface water toward Asia, allowing cooler water to rise off South America. This change in ocean temperature alters the path of the atmospheric jet stream, a fast-moving river of air high above us. The jet stream steers weather systems across North America. When La Niña cools the Pacific, it changes the roadmap for this highway. It's not a guarantee of a specific outcome every single day, but it loads the dice, making certain weather patterns much more likely. Understanding La Niña is the first key to unlocking our winter forecast. This cooling of the Pacific is a major driver of global climate, influencing everything from rainfall in Australia to hurricane season in the Atlantic. That shift is what we'll look at next, as it determines who gets the cold and snow, and who stays relatively mild and dry. Now that we know what La Niña is, let's get to the good stuff. What does it mean for our weather here in the United States? The jet stream typically gets pushed farther north, creating a distinct split in the weather across the nation. For folks in the northern half of the country, a La Niña winter often means colder and stormier conditions. The Pacific Northwest tends to be ground zero for cold air and heavy precipitation. On the flip side, the southern half of the United States typically experiences warmer and drier conditions. This pattern often stretches from California, across the Southwest through Texas and all the way to the Southeast. So, in a nutshell, La Niña creates a strong north-south divide. There's another major factor that can throw a wrench in the works and deliver some truly epic winter weather, and that's the polar vortex. Alright, let's talk about the polar vortex. It's a very large area of low pressure and extremely cold air that sits high above the North Pole. Think of it as a giant spinning top of frigid air contained by a strong jet stream, the polar jet stream. During most of the winter, the polar vortex is strong and stable. When the vortex is strong, we often see milder winter weather here in the mid-latitudes. It's when the vortex weakens or gets disrupted that things get interesting. Imagine giving that spinning top a little nudge. It starts to wobble. This is what we call a disruption of the polar vortex. These wobbles allow big chunks of that intensely cold Arctic air to break free and plunge southward. So when you hear polar vortex in the news, it's usually about a piece of it that has broken off and is heading our way. This frigid air can fuel powerful snowstorms when it collides with warmer, moister air. The polar vortex is always there in winter, but its behavior has a huge impact on how severe our winter cold will be. So, we have our two main characters for the winter of 2025 and 2026, La Niña and the polar vortex. How do they interact? Do they work together, or do they battle for control? La Niña sets the background pattern, the general theme for the winter. Now enter the polar vortex. A disruption of the polar vortex acts like a wild card. It can supercharge the cold that La Niña already has in place for the northern states. If a lobe of the polar vortex breaks off and dives south, you can get record-breaking cold and blockbuster snowstorms. The polar vortex disruption essentially overrides the base La Niña signal for a short period. The timing and location of these polar vortex disruptions are notoriously difficult to predict. So, while La Niña gives us the seasonal outlook, the polar vortex is what delivers the high-impact short-term events. This winter, the big question will be, how often will the polar vortex wobble and where will those lobes of frigid air end up? Let's break down what this La Niña and polar vortex combination could mean for different regions across the United States this winter. Starting in the Pacific Northwest, places like Seattle and Portland are likely in for a classic La Niña winter. Moving east, the northern Rockies and northern plains are also in the crosshairs for a colder than average winter. If the polar vortex weakens, this is the area that would likely experience the most frequent and severe Arctic outbreaks. The Great Lakes and the Northeast present a more complex picture. The general La Niña pattern favors an active storm track through this region. Meanwhile, the southern half of the country is looking at a much different story. From California across the Southwest and Texas, the forecast leans warmer and drier than average. Cold fronts can and will still push through, but they're likely to be less frequent and less potent. However, this is the region that needs to be most on guard for a surprise polar vortex plunge. To get a better handle on what this winter might feel like, it often helps to look back at past winters that had similar setups. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it often rhymes, especially in the world of weather. One winter that comes to mind is the winter of 2010 to 2011. That was a La Niña year that delivered relentless cold and snow, including the infamous Snowmageddon blizzards. La Niña set the stage with a northern storm track, and then several disruptions of the polar vortex sent wave after wave of Arctic air southward. It wasn't just one big event, it was a persistent pattern of cold and snow that lasted for months. We can also look at more recent La Niña winters like 2020 to 2021. During those seasons, we saw the classic pattern play out. However, we also saw a major polar vortex disruption in February 2021 that brought a historic cold snap to Texas. These past events teach us two important things. First, the general La Niña pattern is a reliable guide for the overall seasonal trend. Second, we must always be prepared for the wild card, the polar vortex. Knowing the forecast is one thing, but being prepared is what really matters. Let's start with your home. Before the first freeze, make sure your heating system is in good working order. Check your insulation, especially in attics and crawl spaces, and seal any leaks or drafts around windows and doors. Next, let's talk about your car. Winter driving can be treacherous, so it's essential to have your vehicle ready. Check your tires to make sure they have good tread, and consider switching to winter tires. Make sure your battery is strong, your fluids are topped off, and your wipers are in good shape. And every car should have a winter emergency kit. It's also crucial to have an emergency plan for your family. This winter, with the potential for powerful storms, power outages are a real possibility. Have an emergency supply kit at home with at least 3 days worth of non-perishable food and water. Make sure you have flashlights, a battery-powered or hand-crank radio, and extra batteries. Finally, stay informed. Weather forecasts can and do change. Pay attention to watches and warnings issued by the National Weather Service. A little preparation goes a long, long way. So, there you have it, a look at the big picture for the winter of 2025 and 2026. We've talked about our two main weather drivers, the cool girl La Niña and the wobbling top, the polar vortex. La Niña is expected to set up a classic winter pattern across the country, but we also know that winter loves to throw us a few surprises, and that's where the polar vortex comes in. Any sign of it weakening or wobbling could signal a major blast of Arctic air heading south. The combination of a persistent La Niña pattern with a few polar vortex disruptions could make for a very active and cold winter for many. The most important thing is to use this information to be prepared, not scared. Check on your home, get your car ready for winter driving, and put together an emergency kit. And remember that this is a seasonal outlook. It's a guide, not a guarantee. We'll be here all winter long, tracking every storm and every cold blast. Winter is a beautiful and powerful season, and by understanding the forces that shape it, we can all enjoy it safely. Stay tuned, stay prepared, and we'll get through it together.